A very good afternoon, Your Excellencies, friends and colleagues. Thank you all for being here. I started my work as a human rights advocate at a very early age, at 17 years old, visiting Afghanistan, and in the last 20 years, enduring war, conflict, the loss of family, friends, and colleagues have taught me everything I know now today as a human rights lawyer and the founder of 2 human rights organizations. My mission then, as it is today, 20 years later, remains the same. I'm invested in civil society leaders and human rights lawyers who are underrepresented from the global South and East, to equip them with the skills and the holistic support to document human rights violations credibly, to manage victims of trauma, and to enter law and policy spaces which are exclusive to academic and political elites. The work of human rights is extremely risky, especially when you're at the front lines of justice and accountability work. Some cases were too dangerous for us to take. Witnesses disappeared or were forced to break contact with us when their homes were raided, family members threatened, or shot dead. We worked under the radar for as far as we could, for as long as we could, until at times the very last victim withdrew from the case. Indeed, many cases have to be abandoned midway. Defendants have connections in very high places and are connected to the architects and the profiteers of the wars we see today. It's not that we could not win the case, but that we should not win the case. There is a silence that sets in upon an explosion. A rush of air engulfs the space, sweeping all of life with it. It feels like your heart stops and suspends for a second. Then suddenly time fast forwards and the silence is punctured by a mother's wailing. That piercing scream is how you realize that you're still alive. There's no pause or respite in this work. Another day brings another case. And as lawyers, our job is to wade through evidence after evidence of the worst that humanity we do to each other. Sometimes I functionally work with the evidence. I browse through it. But I also have to tell myself to pause and look at the indignities afflicted on a human body. Terror frozen on the faces at the moment of passing, and a misplaced limb. The terrain of our work is morally complex. We had a case of a woman who was brutally tortured and murdered by her husband. In court, he was indifferent, his demeanor only broken by the anxious licking of his lips and twitching of his shoulder. His story, like most others like him in a world of black and white, will remain unimportant. He, at a very young age, had been thrust into the war, not of his making. He had killed, and he had watched his friends being killed. His eyes were sunken in like craters from insomnia. The war had literally eaten away his peace alive. He was eventually prosecuted and sentenced as he should have. But in these kinds of cases, there's no sense of triumph. You never leave the courtroom happy, just a perfunctory sense of a job done. The deceased father that afternoon left court with his face crumpled with regret. He had not heeded his daughter's cries soon enough. He wished he had not rushed her into marriage. And as lawyers, there's some consolation that we can give to our clients for grief, but none for its more complex counterpart, and that is regret. There is a light at dawn that gently pierces the darkness. It's called the pre-twilight dawn in English, but in Arabic and Farsi we say SAHR, which is the name of my organization. It's the more poetic name, but the long name is Strategic Advocacy for Human Rights. Like the sun that faithfully arises at the horizon every morning, SAHR, in its work and its essence, captures this idea of being steadfast, being committed to show up, regardless of the situation, regardless of the adversities. It is to just show up. As the word of our work spread, more human rights lawyers and grassroots leaders from Argentina to Indonesia contacted us for support. Some of them were like me, founders of their own organizations, leaders of their communities, and they were incredible. Not all of them were lawyers, but they had all the right instinctive attributes of a great advocate, unrelenting, creative, experimental. These individuals would wait at the minister's office for a few hours just to get a 5-minute audience, just to secure a commitment. And I'm invested in these leaders. But there's no playbook, there's no program that prepares you to work in perpetual state of crises. And being a leader in human rights is a very lonely and solitary journey. So in 2020, my team and I, we decided to pilot the SAHR Gender Justice Accelerator Program. It's dedicated to grassroots leaders and human rights defenders, particularly in the global South and East, who are underrepresented. We aim to do 3 things. Number 1, equip them with the skills to document human rights violations credibly and comprehensively, because this is the only way we can visibilize harms done, especially to women and other marginal groups. Unless we put a label and evidence of violation, it does not exist. Second, how do you manage affected communities filled with trauma? And do it without causing harm, to restore their agency and their rights in their journey to justice. And third, law and policy spaces are exclusive. How do we equip these leaders to be masters of law and policy, to be able to speak about these issues as co-equals with the Minister of Justice, for example? This is the mission of our organization. I wanted to address International Peace Day without painting a beautiful picture of hope and optimism. Sometimes I hate optimism. It's rather irritating and not always helpful or realistic. Our world is a world of duality, where hopelessness and hope coexist. But like the rising sun that appears faithfully on the horizon every morning, sometimes we work not because we are always hopeful, but because it's necessary and right. Thank you all very much.
Beautiful.